Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Foundations.
The Maccabees basically stood up and started a 3-year campaign to overthrow the Seleucid Empire. What that meant was that the temple that had been defiled now had to be rededicated, cleaned out, purified.
Foundations. Understanding the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. With Robbo Robinson and Mandy Warby.
In our last program, we began learning about Hanukkah, also known as the Feast of Dedication and the Festival of Lights. This annual celebration is mentioned in the New Covenant in John 10. It took place in the wintertime, and while Hanukkah isn't one of the 7 mandatory feasts of the Lord, it is an annual celebration that has been part of Jewish culture for close to 2,200 years. As mentioned, it was referenced in John 10, 22 and 23, where it says, "At that time the Feast of Dedication took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon."
Yeah, it's one of those little, one of those little quandaries, and you kind of think, okay, well, it's a nice little thing. It was the Feast of Dedication is walking through the temple, and it was cold. But why is that actually important? And we kind of finished off in a last program talking about the fact that there are 2 historical Jewish temples. There was Solomon's temple, and then when it was destroyed by the Babylonians, they went into 70 years captivity. Then they came out, and under Nehemiah and Ezra, they rebuilt. They rebuilt the temple. They rebuilt the walls of the city. And the interesting thing was that was actually, the construction was undertaken by Zerubbabel. And a lot of the people who were old enough to remember Solomon's temple, when they saw this very humble little building that Zerubbabel had built, they wept because they thought, oh, the glory of the first one, and this is kind of sad. Yep. So that in Jewish heritage is not really even mentioned. Then you get to King Herod, who comes to power, and he wants to ingratiate himself with the Jewish people because he's their fake king of the Jews, and he embarks on a building project for the Second Temple, and it took 46 years. Wow. And it was absolutely magnificent. And so that's basically what they call the Second Temple. It was basically a complete rebuilding of, Zerubbabel's humble little effort. Wow. So you've only got 2 temples, and yet Scripture tells us that there were actually 3 dedications. And we mentioned last time that Solomon's temple was dedicated in the autumn. King Herod the Great's temple, the Second Temple, its dedication was in the spring, and yet we're talking about the Feast of Dedication in the winter.
Yeah, so what is the third dedication?
So what is that third dedication? All right, we mentioned Antiochus Epiphanes, who was the ruler of the Seleucid Empire. I've heard Dr. Chuck Missler, the late Dr. Chuck Missler, talk about this particular I don't want to call him a gentleman because he wasn't a gentleman at all. He was a nasty piece of work. And apparently his nickname was Antiochus Epimanes instead of Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth, because the Antiochus Epimanes, means the madman.
Oh, wow. He
was very full of himself. He had delusions of grandeur. And it was in about the year 168 BC, and the Seleucid Empire, that 1/4 of Alexander the Great's empire that split after his death, it controlled the region that Antiochus Epiphanes IV governed when he was on the throne. He came to the throne through murder and intrigue, so he was a very unsavoury character. And he was known to be cruel, and he was barbaric, he was brutal. He already hated the Jews, but if you know anything about the landmass where Judea is, it's like this central hub that connects, all of Africa and the Middle East and Asia, and it's this bridge point.
A linchpin.
Yeah, and whoever controls that basically controls the trade routes and stuff. Well, he made some military campaigns to get into Egypt, and he failed, and he got his rear kicked pretty badly. And he was so angry about it that his hatred, his intense hatred of the Jewish people kind of boiled over, and he took his frustrations out on them. And what he did was he outlawed Judaism. So he passed all these laws that forbade reading the Torah, forbade observing the rules of Judaism, forbade the keeping of the Sabbath, forbade eating kosher food. He forbade circumcision of baby boys. Anybody contravening these laws was given a death sentence. And monthly raids were done and inspections, and anybody found with the Torah, anybody found with a circumcised baby boy, I mean, not only were they killed, but they were killed in the most brutal of fashions.
Wow.
What he wanted was the Jews to basically embrace his worldview, the gods of the ancient Grecian Empire. He wanted them to conform. And of course, that was never going to happen. And they put up with a lot. They endured a lot. They actually developed one of the traditions that has come into and is part of the celebrations of Hanukkah is the spinning of the little dreidel. It's the dreidel game.
Okay.
And I've never played it, but my understanding is that it has letters on the little dreidel, and they would spin that and play a game, and the letters meant certain things within Judaism. So it was a way of being able to practice their faith in secret. And so there was no way in the world that, this attempt was going to stop the Jews from being the Jews. But a lot of people died as a result. But what really brought it to a head was that he decided that he was going to take over the temple. He took all of the vessels that had been remade and put there and, kept them for himself. He had a pig slaughtered on the altar in the temple. And if that wasn't bad enough, he then had a statue of Zeus put into the Holy of Holies.
Wow.
Now, the Holy of Holies was the one place on planet Earth where God's presence was said to dwell. Now, we know our God as being the Most High God. And if you know anything about the Greek religious system and beliefs of all of their different gods, Zeus was known to be the father of the gods, or the Most High God.
Yeah.
And so this was a direct insult and, challenge, basically, to the God of Israel. And that was the end of it. Mm-hmm. That actually provoked what they called the Maccabean revolt. Okay? The Maccabees basically stood up and started a 3-year campaign to overthrow the Seleucid Empire. And they did it.
Wow.
It took them 3 years, but they did it. What that meant was that the temple that had been defiled now had to be rededicated, cleaned out, and then rededicated, purified.
Because obviously having a pig slaughtered on the altar is like just completely contrary to the Jewish religion at every level.
Absolutely. They weren't even allowed to physically touch a pig. They couldn't touch the ground that a pig had touched, if you know what I mean. That's how offensive and unclean this was. So they're having this pig slaughtered in the temple. So they had to clean it all out. But then part of the process of the rededication is the lighting of the menorah, the 7-branched candlestick. Well, the rededication was set for the 25th of Kislev, which also happened to be Antiochus Epiphanes' birthday, so it was, I think, a little bit of an insult to him too. But they needed oil. Now, the oil to be burnt in the temple had to be especially produced to make sure that it was kosher, and it took a week to produce this special oil. They only had enough oil for 1 day. So the way the menorah works is you've got the 7 branches. One branch is called the servant. You light that, and then off that you then light the first branch and then the second branch. But they only had enough oil to last for 1 day. The miracle of Hanukkah, which is why it's called the Festival of Lights, because the menorah is the light in the temple, is that the 1 day's worth of oil lasted a full 8 days, because that first day and then a week after for the production of more oil. That's the miracle of Hanukkah.
Wow.
This 8 days worth of oil.
So it's a miraculous provision that God took care of.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
And that is why there is a variation in the menorah. Sometimes you will see the 7-branched menorah. That is the one to sit in the temple proper. But the 9-branched menorah is the Hanukkah menorah. One branch is the servant branch, and the other 8 branches to represent the days of the miracle of this 1 day's worth of oil burning for that full 8 days.
Well, we've got more to learn about Hanukkah, and we're going to do that in the next program. Finishing this series, and in particular, we're going to learn what's so important for both Jews and Christians in the future in reference to Hanukkah.
This has been Foundations, a look at the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. For study notes, resources and more, see vision.org.au/foundations.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.